All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar today. Today we're discussing how legal and compliance teams can really contribute to company culture. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices. To give some context for folks who may not be familiar with AllVoices, we're an always-on employee listening tool to ensure a true culture of trust, inclusion, and safety and transparency in the workplace at companies around the world. And today we're discussing specifically how legal and compliance teams can contribute to company culture. We know that a culture of integrity really impacts the business. Gartner released a study that said people who have a culture of integrity have a 2-time higher employee engagement rate and also a 12% higher employee activity at companies who have that strong company culture. To our audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat on the right, and we'll incorporate your questions into the discussion. With that, I'll stop talking and pass it to our panelists just to introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and what your role entails at your company. Sharon, would love to pass to you first.
Yeah, hi, it's Sharon Zezima. I am General Counsel and Chief Data Ethics Officer at Acoustic, which is a marketing technology company. I have been, this is my 5th tech company, so I've been in senior leadership roles in the legal side and actually some non-legal roles for many years now. And I guess I will add, part of the reason I'm on this panel is I am very passionate about culture and building positive culture.
Awesome. Sarah, do you want to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Robson. I'm currently working at Affirm. We're a fintech company in the buy now, pay later space in San Francisco. And my title is Senior Compliance and Ethics Program Manager. And my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. Janine.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Yancey, pronouns she, her. I'm a recovering employment litigator, currently founder and CEO of Emtrain, which provides e-learning on ethics, compliance, anti-harassment, and inclusion topics, as well as workforce analytics.
And last but not least, Megan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Niedermeyer. I'm the General Counsel of Fivetran, an Oakland-based data pipeline company. I previously led the legal and compliance teams at Gusto, a small business HR and payroll platform. Similar to folks on here, passionate about the role that culture plays in building high-impact teams and how legal and compliance teams can not just support that, but lead in that effort as well. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Awesome. Again, thank everyone for being here today to talk about this big topic. When we were on our pre-call, one of the foundational questions we wanted to start with was really how is legal a separate role and function outside of compliance? And would love to hear your thoughts on this first, Sharon.
Yeah, so first of all, I think the title of this program should probably have been how can legal and compliance teams contribute to a positive culture, because they can actually contribute to a negative culture, a neutral culture, a positive culture. And I think what we want to talk about is how legal can actually contribute to make company culture more positive. And what role do they have in playing that? And stepping first, I'll get to compliance in a second, but just in general, I think that we're all corporate citizens. We're all employees of the place that we work, and every employee has an impact on the culture in some way. The more senior you get, if you're managing a team, then your impact is greater. I feel very responsible as the leader of the legal function to foster a good culture within my own team, but also as a member of the executive team at my company, helping to foster a positive culture within the company. So that's kind of just general, that we all have that role to play. It's not just specific to legal, but legal has its own role within the company culture. Like I say, it could be positive, it could be negative, depending on how you approach it. I approach legal this is sort of a buzzword these days, but I think it really applies here, in a very human-centered way. That we're doing the legal services and the compliance work for a company that's made up of employees, with customers, with partners, and being empathetic in how you approach the work that you do and how you're doing it for that group of stakeholders? Is it user friendly? What is the underlying spirit of what you're trying to do? Not just a check the box sort of compliance effort, but why do these compliance rules matter? What compliance? The foundational word is to comply. Well, why should I comply as an employee or as a partner, as a supplier? And getting to that why and the spirit of what's important underlying all of it, whether that's integrity or something else. But there's always something underlying compliance, or for that matter, other things that we do within the legal team.
Absolutely. I think the why is definitely important, and everybody is responsible, like you said, for company culture. But one of the things that oftentimes employees associate these teams with is a code of conduct, but not really understanding the why behind it. Sarah, we talked about how you helped establish a code of conduct at Affirm in a really intentional way. Can you tell us about the priorities kind of you were thinking about when you did that?
Sure. So I joined Affirm in October, which was shortly before we we went public with our IPO in January. So obviously that was my kind of goal right off the bat to launch that code. And I think one of the things that was there are a couple things I can talk about. The first was this past June, the DOJ came up with some updated guidance. And I think like that was really kind of a cool time for me in that, okay, I can dive super deep into this before I start this job. I know what I'm going to have to do immediately. And it provided a blueprint, like, I know what I'm doing. The guidance I don't think was like shocking to anybody, but just kind of a check mark. Okay, did I cover that base? Have we done this? Have we done that? So I'd encourage other people to revisit that guidance. It is a really great reminder. And then I think the other thing is like what was cool at Affirm is we have core values like so many companies do these days. And one of our core values is no fine print. And we translate that around transparency in finances and how we offer financial services to consumers, but take that to ethics. And unlike my counterparts here, I'm actually not an attorney. So I think what was fun for me is to think, okay, no fine print. I don't want this to be a legalese document. I want anyone to be able to pick it up and actually read it and understand it. So I think that that's particularly important. I think also just how you build your team to write your code is really important. I was the project manager, so sometimes you need maybe the drafter, the core drafter is not the same person as the project manager. So we did have a drafting team, and then I PM'd and kind of ran all, jobs. And then maybe one last thing I'll bring up, which I think is really important and I love is, I previously worked at Airbnb, which is a very design focused company. So that was really drilled into me being there for almost 7 years. But, I was emphatic about having a beautiful document and having one that reads pretty and like the font, everything. And I think what you'll see if you do go and read Affirm's code, that there's a design aesthetic to it. And I think that also shows our employees and the public and future shareholders that we care about this and we invested on making a document that's beautiful and easy to read and easy to
Can I jump in, Christina?
Yes.
So I would so echo what Sarah just said. And in fact, one of the principles in our legal team is keep it simple, don't over lawyer. And part of what's in that is speak in a way that the business can understand you. And similarly, when we were going public at GoPro, we had to do a code of conduct because that is a quote unquote check the box thing that you need to have. And you could make it a purely check the box, do your basics of what you need to do, or you can make it something that actually embodies values of your company, values of business integrity and other things and is very readable. and that people will want to read. And we actually recognize that as lawyers, we're not always able to speak in a way that's accessible to employees. And we actually had the marketing team help us put that document together in a way that was really snappy and snazzy. So, I would say that, like, if you're used to writing policies in a really dry, uninteresting way that's not accessible, then seek out help to make it better, more user-friendly. Like, I'll keep going back to that, but legal has to be user-friendly.
I love that Sharon and Sarah both mentioned values. I think it cannot be understated the importance of values underpinning everything, including the code of conduct, including the policies that a legal and a compliance team rolls out. And if you're a smaller company just getting started, I think a values exercise is a great place to kind of ground yourself in building out broader policies for your company. It's also great to just talk about the values really frequently, like make them living and alive and make sure they're top of mind for your employee base. One of the things we do at Fivetran that I love is in every all hands meeting, we have sort of a values hero where we spotlight somebody in the company who exhibited one of our core 3 values. And we talk about sort of what happened and how they showed up and how their colleagues and the customers really felt alive through that value. And so I think it's important to keep those top of mind because your values may change. You may learn things by keeping values top of mind, and you can really kind of help push not just the legal and compliance aspect of how does the code of conduct relate to our values, but also the broader, hey, how are we all showing up together?
And Megan, just one comment, which I think touches on everything that people have been saying here. Sharon, you mentioned just the comply, right? And then we talk about the why. And I always like to say that laws follow people. People don't follow laws. And what I mean by that, let's look at our current global data privacy reg that came out in California. Well, the social why was Russia hacked Facebook and data got, in the world and was misused. And so now we have laws about data privacy. So when we think about how we're addressing all these issues, it all starts with social issues, which is the why. So Sarah, to your point, it has to be beautiful because that's part of it. These are competencies to learn, and you'll hear me talk about this more. But the rules are a product of the social issues. So let's focus on the social issues.
Yeah, and actually, on that note, I said I was Chief Data Ethics Officer at Acoustic in addition to General Counsel, and that encompasses privacy and data protection, but it's really this concept of data ethics is what's important to people, what's important to your consumers, and that's a higher bar often than what the law requires. So don't just focus on compliance, focus on the big picture of what are the expectations of people that you're serving, what are the trends, what's good governance around that. So it's a much sort of broader umbrella around data protection and privacy, but I think you can look at that in any form of compliance, like what is the bigger picture concept?
And the bigger picture is what people are going to be interested in. People are not interested in the rules. They're interested in the bigger picture and why it matters to society, to them, so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes back to your earlier point, Sharon, of just like human-centric approach and also coming back to the why. I wanted to go back to one of the kind of points that, Sarah, you brought up too in terms of accessibility, user-friendliness. We do have a question from someone in the audience around how would you articulate the first step if for folks who are afraid to reach out to legal and HR teams, regardless of cultural differences and being inclusive at the same time. So what I hear with this question is, how do you really communicate to employees how to kind of engage with the teams?
Yeah, so I think that means that's your training program. So we're kind of like maybe moving in into a different topic. But one thing that we do at Affirm is for all new hires, we do a training program, and that's me. It makes it really easy now that we're all on Zoom, so it doesn't have to be in person. but committing that time for new hires when they first start so they recognize a name, a face with the ethics program. Hopefully they perceive me to be approachable and easy to talk to. And so that's one way. Another one that I've had some success with is FAQs. So like, so we're talking about you're afraid to reach out. Let's say it's something, a sensitive issue. So what I do is we have an intranet called Confluence at Affirm, and I built out an ethics page, which has tons of different information. But one thing that I think is hopefully cool to this question is an FAQ about what happens when I do, let's say, submit a report of misconduct, et cetera. And I go into tons of detail there around what that process looks like and what we do. And I think that demystifying that process breaks down any, hopefully, fear around being mistreated or right. That process is available is the same whoever you are. Hopefully that helps.
I would also say get legal out in front of the company as often as possible. You mentioned orientation, and I love that, Sarah, and absolutely think that's critical. Also, getting on staff meetings and talking about what the OKRs are, the objectives, key results, if you have them, or goals for legal for the year. One of the things I did when I came in early on was do a legal survey for the whole company. And then I took the results and different members of our team went to different staffs to talk about them along with goals and other things. But it makes people think legal, actually cares about what people think and what our, how our services are. But also it shows that we're just real people. And people can engage with us without being intimidated.
I love that, Sharon. I saw that one of the questions in the chat was, what would you think would be a starter kit for sort of people appreciating compliance? I think like the fundamental is lawyers are people too. We care about some of the same things. We can chat about our dogs and our favorite coffee shop. And so feel free to connect with your legal and compliance teams on areas that maybe aren't specifically legal and see where it leads.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to just, especially for new hires, and it can be intimidating to just reach out to anyone at the company as well. I know in our webinars, one of the topics that always comes up is we're talking about a lot of action and what you need to have in place, code of conduct, rules that need to be followed. But how do you really measure the ROI or the success of compliance and ethics programs, knowing that depending on the program, every result will be different? For example, a lot of people think that when no one uses their whistleblower hotline for anonymous feedback, that's a sign of success. But we know that feedback is out there, they're just not using it. So, Janine, I'd love to pass this question to you first and talk about kind of that, the data part of it.
Yeah, I think it starts with approaching these topics like their competencies to learn, not just rules to memorize. I think for many, many years, the industry has just handed out a policy and then did a one-way training exercise. So like just, information going one way. And I think that, what we'll start to see trending, and certainly what we do at Emtrain, is it's a two-way dialogue. So we approach these topics as competencies that you got to learn, develop, and practice over time. And within a course or topic, we will be pulsing and surveying people's understanding and how does that concept apply in their work team. So, for example, one of our clients is a 100,000 person global tech firm, and they rolled out one of our courses. I think it was a global anti-bribery course. And we're kind of having people apply the concepts into their particular workplace, through surveys in the actual content. And it's kind of like a mini audit. And so we found out information, the client found out some information right then and there. And so that they could take their small compliance team. It's all relative. It's big because it's a big company, but compliance teams are always small. And then they can be really focused on where do we spend our time? Who do we need to have lunch and learns with? Who do we need to talk to? Where are there some weaknesses? So when you think about data and measurement, I mean, think about it as like your high school algebra class in a way. It's like, well, we need to figure out what people know and where they are in their journey and identify the gaps. And we can do that actually within training, I think, and you start to score people. And let me just give one other thing. Like, here's a very simple, this was another client, rolled out an insider trading course. Simple thing. Do you understand what is confidential information here? Strongly agree, strongly disagree. And we saw in this one client, like, there was a number of people who didn't know what confidential information was for their organization. So simple stuff like that, but amazingly helpful.
I think that's a good example too, because what we're talking about here is empowering employees to know that they are making these decisions in the correct way. They're thinking about these things with that lens of a culture of integrity and just thinking about that as well. And it goes to the values of the company too, which is something that Megan, you reemphasized as well. Another question that we kind of have is, how does your company really encourage everyone to think about culture when they're making decisions on their day-to-day, in their processes, on their teams? Megan, how do you do that at your company?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's where I find values to be really helpful, because there's one lens that lawyers and compliance professionals can take, which is, hey, the law says we have to do this, we have to do this. But that only will kind of get you so far and work with so many people. That why behind the what, which really goes back to, hey, what does our company stand for? What are the things that we anchor around that we've all decided are really important, and that's why we're here together? Bringing the values piece into it of, well, we say we're going to be really transparent. If we are going to make this change, how are we thinking about sharing it with the rest of the company and making sure the employees are on board? And so putting the values into your decision-making process is also really.
Yeah, and actually, I just on the values, because I've worked on several values at several companies, and I think that it's kind of a given that companies need to have values so people understand, but not just values, the behaviors that are consistent with those values, and those are kind of two different exercises, but they go together. We actually just completed that at Acoustic, and I've done it at my other companies. But I will say the interesting thing at Acoustic was two of the members of the small task force that put the values together were actually on the legal team. So when you say how can legal affect or contribute to a positive culture, it's not just what we do. It's actually, like I say, we're part of the greater citizenry.
Yeah, I think too, like in the decision-making process, pulling those values in, one thing, and a second piece I find helpful is bringing in more voices and sort of an army behind you. It helps not just offer the legal team, hey, we're not just one voice telling you what to do, but making sure that any big decisions, you've previewed it with your employee resource group leaders, you've had a separate session with your HR team, you've done a separate session with the executive team. Having more voices who've been able to give feedback on a new change or a process helps them make, they feel invested in it. They want to see it succeed. They have a little bit more.
I think involving everyone in that process, whether it's employee resource groups, leaders, managers, and really opening up a space for that feedback is super important. Sarah, how do you think about, effective programs at Affirm and building out, programs that go beyond just the individual, like hour training or, the time spent with employees?
Yeah, so I like to think of it as like a kind of a marketing campaign to some extent, right? So you're thinking of all the different ways that you can engage with employees. So not just training, but also through, we use Mattermost. Some people use Slack, like ways that you can interact there. One thing that I've also been working with is reaching out to all of our ERGs. So when we launched our hotline here, I went and spoke at every ERG, just like a casual meeting. So not in a sort of formal prescribed way, but really just like, hey, I'm Sarah. If you don't know me yet, this is what I do. We've just launched this tool. I want you all to know about it. If you ever need to use it, here's how it works, blah, blah, blah. And I think the next program that I'll be launching, which is something I'd done at my former employer, will be launching a group of employee ambassadors of ethics. So going beyond just ethics is something that you engage with the legal team, it becomes a program that you can engage with your actual peers. So let's say perhaps you have a team of like 15 employees out there, and we train them to answer basically I would think of them as like future questions, right? How do I not violate the code of ethics, for example? But then these become a resource within that's even more approachable within your team as opposed to going to legal.
Yeah, I think approaching it from an approachable and digestible way, especially for folks who aren't as familiar or they're just starting out in an organization, is really important. And I feel like a common thread throughout the conversation too is getting in front of employees and teams and really having a candid conversation with them as well.
And I think the other thing there is like, I'm new to Affirm, right? So people don't know me, but if I can tap into an employee who's been around for 5 years and has an incredible, reputation as being a trusted person, why not make that person my ethics ambassador, for example?
Yeah, I like the idea of ethics ambassadors as well. And really, again, empowering employees to be part of the process too. Megan, have you seen really kind of effective communication around like policies for employees that are really they understand them even if they're not in ethics and compliance? And have you seen any kind of mistakes made as well?
I'm laughing because, yes, I've seen mistakes, and I've also been the person who's made the mistakes. And so like learning through my mistakes is, when you're rolling out a new change or something that's really foundational for the company and important, always over communicate. Don't think that sending another Slack or another email is going to be too much. I'd rather have employees feel like they really felt like they really got to them than it was a Slack in a channel that they missed and weren't paying attention to. I think a common mistake is saying, hey, we put it in the Slack channel or we put it on our internal knowledge base. Everybody should know about it by now. So there can't be any too much communication when it's a really foundational change for the business or something related to your values.
I think coming back to values is always important. And I think you don't sound like a broken record. It should be something that folks definitely think about, whether you're an employee or on the decision-making end too. If employees want to provide feedback or ask questions and maybe they're, embarrassed by the question because it was on the knowledge base or it was on Slack, how do you think about collecting feedback from your companies? And I'll pass to Sharon first.
Well, there's very many channels for feedback. I mean, one-to-one with your manager, your peers. You can have company meetings where you have open questions. You can have engagement surveys. You can have pulse surveys. And of course, there's, I know AllVoices being the host here, that is a, real-time culture platform for input on anything, including complaints. And I guess I do want to, just because I didn't say this earlier when we were talking about the whistleblower hotline, but it's a good example where you can go and get a whistleblower hotline and be very specific about what the legal requirement is and having a whistleblower hotline and roll that out to your employees, hopefully getting good adoption. Or you can use a broader platform like AllVoices where you're actually engaging on a regular basis with your employees to get feedback anonymously and otherwise, and including complaints that would serve the purpose of a whistleblower hotline. But I think that's a good example of where you're really thinking about adoption and engagement and user friendliness. How being human centered, sort of how. What is important to employees and how are employees going to best provide feedback? And there's no one single way, but the more avenues that you have, the more likely you will be to find the one that works for the largest number of employees.
Megan, how do you think about collecting kind of feedback at Fivetran as well, of just like a holistic approach and just like people kind of being approachable to give that feedback as well?
Yeah, a great question. So Fivetran is a data company. We really live in the data analytics space, and that means we apply that really intense focus on data both internally as well as externally for our customers. One of the reasons that we chose to implement AllVoices is because we can get really great data and run reports, and with those numbers, it can be easier to make decisions and also to bring a kind of coalition together around, hey, the data is showing this. there's less room for bias. There's less room for interpretation of whether that feedback was valid or not. Hey, it's feedback and we have the numbers right here. I think you can't just rely on data, though. That human approach that Sharon is emphasizing is so key. And one thing that I think is really important for legal and compliance teams is to always have an open door. We are similar to your HR partners in that you can book time on my calendar for any topic or no topic at all, just because you want to connect. And I will always make time, whether it's this afternoon is a different question, but we will always make time to connect because there should be that kind of two-way street of feeling really comfortable with your legal and compliance team.
And I think that culture of feedback and trust definitely manifests throughout the organization. And Janine, I wanted to really ask you too, since you brought up just like going back to competencies and really wanting folks to learn and implement these practices in their everyday. Why do you think it's important to build like that culture of trust, and how do you see it kind of playing out in the workplace?
I think that we've talked about this before. In order to get a high performing organization and one that has some recruitment power, you need a really strong corporate brand. And in today's, day, that involves trust, right? And so, we have seen in working through clients and before my experience as a litigator on behalf of companies, it really takes, I think, having an organization where you've got systems, just well ingrained systems for making decisions. You've got norms of behavior where, like, even if there's not a manager or leader in the room, people kind of show up a certain way and interact a certain way. And then you've got accountability. And if you've got a culture with those three things, you will have trust. Trust will be the outcome of that culture. And I think that, all of this it's actually, you can be very intentional and create that culture. If you are just just intentionally say, okay, I'm going to build a culture where we don't shoot from the hip. We're integrating, a mode where we're just going to create, some kind of a system for making a decision. We're going to make sure that there's accountability. And we're going to make sure that we have very clear, understandable norms of behavior, whether or not there's a policy on an issue, like we show up a certain way. And if you do all that, you will be building a culture of trust.
Yeah, I definitely don't think a culture of trust, especially accountability, happens overnight, and it doesn't happen if you don't work on it as well. And it needs to respond to the current climate that we're in. People are changing all of the time. Circumstances change. And one of the other pieces that we discussed in our kind of pre-discussion was the role of, the anti-racism movement, culture risk this year, ESG, in terms of what boards are really asking teams to report on right now. Megan, what are your kind of thoughts about that in response to all of the things that are happening this year?
Yeah, it's a lot this year. And I think this year more than any, we realize the importance of having those connections with coworkers and colleagues and having trust and building trust in a remote environment. I think that, having data is a great place to start in terms of being able to report to your board, seeing trends over time, using pulse reports, regular surveys that have sort of standard questions that don't change over time. All of those are important to feed into the general employee sentiment so you can understand, hey, our employees are our biggest asset at this company, right? Our customers are served because our employees are happy. Our product is great because our employees are happy. Our talent goes up when our employees want to bring in more high talented people to the organization. So thinking about your talent and your people and sort of how that data trends over time is equally as important as thinking about things like, hey, what's our projected revenue growth for next year? Well, some of that will depend on the talent and being able to keep, retain, and attract.
Sharon, what are your thoughts around kind of the changes that we're seeing this year and what metrics to report on?
Yeah, so first of all, this is a really important area that legal has an impact on, at least at what I do as a general counsel. And in past companies, I work a lot with the board, and culture issues are increasingly becoming more important to the board. And so in being responsible for board governance around culture risk and ESG, I have a huge impact on the culture of the company because, there are things, it's a top-down effect on the company. And so that's just one thing to note is the potential impact in positive ways, hopefully, that you can have on the companies through your work with the board. So, for instance, on one of my past companies, we had a non-diverse board, and I was probably the loudest, I was the loudest person about diversifying our board and starting with bringing women onto the board. And I think I influenced the fact that we actually did bring a woman onto the board because of continuing to talk about it and push it and say we needed to do it and it's important to employees. And then that first woman who came on became the head of the Nominating and Governance Committee, and she worked to bring another woman and then, a few other more diverse board members over time. I had that very real impact. I'm not taking responsibility for the diversity of the board, but you can have an impact in the culture area. Early on I had, as the Me Too movement came up, I and the head of the Nominating and Governance Committee talked about culture risk as something that the board ought to start tracking. And now that is, I think pretty clear to boards. Like cybersecurity was 5-7 years ago, culture risk is now one of those areas that need to be tracked. And how do you track it? What's a culture dashboard? What are the aspects of a culture dashboard that the board could come back to and compare quarter over quarter or year over year how things were going in the culture area? And some of that is subsumed also in the ESG concept, which I think public boards are more attuned to than private boards. So I will say our board, I'm in a private PE-owned company, our PE firm is very focused on ESG and providing metrics around ESG, even as a private company. And so I think you are increasingly seeing that even with private companies. And for those of you, I think everybody may know this, but ESG is environmental, social, and governance. And those are sort of three separate areas. And within the social areas, often where you see the diversity inclusion initiatives, for instance, and then governance, maybe around the diversity of your board, but also, things like, are you talking about culture risk on a regular basis? That's, I think more of a governance topic now, as well as, a human capital topic.
Yeah, and Sharon, I'll just add that I would say for the last year, all of the clients and companies coming to us looking for D&I programs, they're usually it's a compliance officer either kind of heading up that effort or at least in the mix. And so I think that's kind of just another indicator that compliance is leaning in to make sure that D&I becomes, a first priority issue because they are reporting up to the board. Especially, I don't think we've said it already, but Sarah, you mentioned the DOJ memo last summer. Right on the heels of that was the SEC memo saying, hey, it's time to start reporting D&I metrics on your annual report. And so I think that maybe, kind of was the trigger for the chief compliance officers to say, all right, we need to start leaning in a little bit more on the D&I issues.
Someone has a question around how exactly you define culture risk. Does anyone want to define that for us?
So I'll start because I have a very specific idea that, and I've had it for years, ever since I was a litigator. You look at, I think the market has always kind of siloed HR function, compliance function, and D&I function, and I see them as overlapping and very integrated and holistic. And so when I think of culture risk, I think it's your ethics, your respect, and your inclusion all mapped together, and where they overlap, that's the culture. I mean, to me, that's like the foundation of your culture. It's how do we show up and treat each other, and how do we make decisions together? And I'll open it up from there.
Yeah, I think when I said this came out of Me Too, it was really more of a focus on it. Not that some of us weren't thinking about this earlier on, but people saw what happened with Uber when the underlying culture was toxic in certain ways and really affected the company financially and in other ways, and that the board needed to make this a huge priority. And so that got other companies realizing that culture actually has an effect on the company, the financial bottom line, the ability to attract and retain employees, and other ways. It may be how consumers view the company, and that matters. So understanding, like I said, like cybersecurity, that there are risks when culture goes south, when culture is negative or toxic. So what are the indicators of a healthy culture? So turnover might be one of the metrics. The complaints you're getting. So, having AllVoices or some tool where you can do a dashboard on what the regular feedback of employees are, what the complaints are. It might be Glassdoor reviews, for instance. And you sometimes have to take those with a grain of salt, but people read them. Customer complaints. So, what are the things for your particular business that would be indicators, good, high level for board consumption, indicators of the health of your culture?
Perfect. That was definitely a helpful definition, said Teddy. So thank you for defining that. Also ESG as well as one of the many industry acronyms as well. I feel like a lot of what we're talking about too is new. We talked about the Me Too movement and how it changed the industry as well. What are other kind of trends you're seeing across legal and compliance that will change the future of this industry? We talk a lot about reimagining and redefining HR, and again, not siloing it, but what are you seeing in kind of the breadth of the work that you're doing? And this question is for everybody, and I'll pass to Megan first.
Yeah, I really see legal and compliance as a key partner on diversity efforts and sort of working hand in hand, not just with the HR function or the DEI function, if it's a standalone function, but across the whole executive team, including the founders, the CEO. I think it's maybe historically with diversity efforts were seen as something that lives within HR, but I think we've seen over the last year especially that this is really intrinsically related to all parts of the business. It's going to impact your ability to bring on great talent if you're a sales leader. It's going to impact your ability to maybe do another fundraise if you're a finance leader. From the legal perspective, it's something that you'll be thinking about talking with at the board level and making sure you watch it as a potential risk factor. And so it's so cross-functional that I think legal's role in diversity is really key.
Janine, what are your thoughts?
So I think that legal and compliance, or I'll just specify compliance, will start to be pushed to be more transparent. And what I mean by that is if you look at your sales function, if you look at your marketing function, if you look at your engineering function, technology has allowed the CEO to see everything. Right? You see the indicators. So in marketing, you see top of the funnel traffic. You see where they're converting into the middle of the funnel. You see, your hand raisers at the bottom of the funnel. You see everything. And, I kind of have an interesting perspective because I was both a lawyer, outside counsel, and now I'm a CEO responsible for 60 people. And as a CEO, I'm looking at it as like, this is gonna change. So legal and compliance has been historically opaque. You've got your compliance leader that owns, they're like the queen or king of the fiefdom. It's like, here's your metrics, and everything before that is completely opaque. And it's going to change. And CEOs and the market and the boards are going to demand transparency and key indicators and predictors of claims. Like, Boeing's going to have demanded, let us know when we're facing a huge company, threatening ethics scandal before it happens. A huge bribery issue before it happens. Half the company walking out has happened, for a couple of tech firms recently before it happens. And I think it's possible. And I think that that's where this industry is going.
So we have not siloing DEI efforts just to HR. We have transparency, not opaqueness. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think mine sort of builds on what Megan was saying, but I think the legal team of the future and the compliance team of the future is not just lawyers, right? I think this is really cool that I've seen, especially in tech, is having a team that's built up of different kinds of personalities. Like, we can all be working towards the same goal, but come at it from different perspectives or different backgrounds. And that really, I think, sometimes achieves the goal in a more holistic way. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer myself, but I've worked in the legal space for over 12 years and love it. I think specifically, like when you think about an ethics and compliance program, maybe you don't have the headcount to have lots of people, but maybe you're bringing together some sort of a team from different parts of the company that can help you reach people in a different way. I was actually attending a workshop last week, and it was a woman working in ethics at a big multinational company, and she was a behavioral scientist. So I think that is we're moving away from this like belief that you've got to be a lawyer to do XYZ. And I think that that's good for all of us.
Yeah, and I guess I would say the opposite too is you can be a lawyer and do other things that are just legal. And that's where we get back to culture. You can be a part of the company culture and have impact. But I've run Corp Dev. I'm now also the Chief Data Ethics Officer. I think more and more you're actually seeing lawyers get very involved in the business and really understand the business and be able to make decisions about the business or really well-informed recommendations that mix business and legal, or that might even just be business because you're there at the table hearing the same things everybody else does. So I'd say, one thing is just the broader role of the legal team and the playgrounds that it can play in, and that does reflect some of what some other people said. But I'd also add tools and tech. I mean, we know that legal operations has become a big area within legal functions, for instance. But I think in this area that we're talking about around culture and compliance, those tools are getting better and better. The user interfaces are getting better, and the usability, the what they can do are getting better. So we talked about AllVoices being both a hotline and a real-time feedback generally. That's something new because to date we've only had hotlines. I talked about culture dashboards. I think the companies that can put together a good culture dashboard that is fed by data that exists within the company on a regular basis that isn't really manual, that will be a great tool. I don't think it really exists, but I think people are working on it. I think we're going to continue to see a lot of evolution and improvement in tools and tech that the legal team works with or that is, it participates in working with.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for participating on that question. I think it's really helpful to understand as well what you're seeing. And I think along the same lines, Clarissa has a question around how you really minimize negativity in the workplace she works at a company that is just, implementing HR. And I think that's the same for a lot of startups or smaller companies. As you begin to scale and you add your first chief ethics officer or GC, and you have to structure processes and things change. How do you kind of minimize that negativity that other employees may see this as? And anyone can answer.
Just acknowledge that it's hard, right? Sometimes talking about it openly, like this is hard. It's going to be a little bit hard for a while. Change is hard. That can be really helpful to just put it out in the open.
I think that goes back to our more human conversations and recognizing that everyone is a person no matter what department you are in. And also for our conversations and webinars, it's also really helpful for folks who are just starting out in their career in legal and compliance. With all of your kind of experience right now, is there anything that you wish you would have known when you were starting out in your career? And this question is also for everyone. Sarah, would you like to start?
Oh gosh.
I can jump in while you think about it, Sarah. Yeah. So I think it's similar to what I was talking about before about being really part of the business, business partners, but we're also part of the business. And I think when I came from a law firm in-house, I still thought of myself as a lawyer. Like that's what I was. And I had legal skills that I contributed to the company. And it took me a while to realize, no, I'm actually in a position that most people aren't in the company, which is I serve and has visibility into the entire business. And and that's actually really meaningful. It becomes more meaningful if I actually really learn and understand the business. So as I've matured and had teams, I talk to people about really understanding how the business works. If you're supporting product, really understand how our product is built. If you're supporting the marketing team, what are the marketing team's objectives for this year and how are we helping to achieve those objectives? Me as the general counsel, I kind of need to know everything about the company. We should all understand the financials of our company. That underpins so much. So it's really kind of that realization that we are part of the business. You need to understand the business, and the better you understand the business, the better you're going to be in partnering with the business and making good decisions and recommendations.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that similar to Sharon, I just encourage everyone to be creative. Because I think, and we're not only speaking to lawyers, but people that are in the ethics and compliance roles, the more you can be creative, I think the better. And I think when you're in those roles, you're usually good problem solvers. So to Sharon's point, like use your good problem solving abilities and really try to integrate yourself as much as possible into the actual business function.
Mine might be around forgiveness and self-compassion, kind of for our teammates, for our company, for ourselves. I think especially if you work in the technology company space, you are building the plane as you're flying it, as they say. And so you're constantly changing, you're constantly adjusting, and it is humanly impossible to do everything right 100% of the time. And so I think giving yourself a little bit of breathing room, giving your colleagues some breathing room, knowing that, getting most things directionally right is a really great place to start.
Okay, I have one now. I think it's around listening. I think so often, definitely, if I look back over the years, as you're younger, you really want to contribute. You want to show your worth when you start a job or when you start a new role or what have you. And listening really, it's so simple, but it is the best thing. And I think somebody said this to me once, and I think this is a really great piece of advice, is you don't need to show your worth in your new job on day 3. We hired you because we know you can do the job. So sit back, listen, absorb the information, and you'll get there. You'll contribute. So there you go.
Good.
That's a good one.
Thanks.
No, I think that's an important insight to remember as well, because folks do want to contribute on day 3 as well. And I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much for everyone for spending an hour with us and dedicating your time to speak on this topic. I took a couple of notes myself in terms of things that I have learned. And this will be a recorded webinar. So folks who had to drop off or join at a later time will be available on our AllVoices website. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Can I just say how awesome it is to have a panelist of all women who are just phenomenal? And I have learned so much on this call that I've been taking notes myself. So I want to thank all the other panelists as well for showing up, and thank you to AllVoices.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I learn something every time I'm on a panel. Thank you, all fellow panelists.
Yes, a panel of amazing folks. Thank you so much. And to reiterate, if for those who are listening, if you aren't familiar with AllVoices, we really believe in a culture of feedback and think it's a requirement in order for everyone to succeed. And we really value a psychologically safe workplace, whether you are fully remote, hybrid, or going back into the office. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the team. And all of the LinkedIns of our panelists are in the event info section. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we'll see you soon.